Deep within the fog-enshrouded waters of San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz stands as a symbol of both confinement and defiance. The island fortress, notorious for housing America's most dangerous criminals, was designed to be absolutely inescapable. Yet, despite its formidable defenses, 3 prisoners, Frank Morris and brothers Clarence and John Anglin, managed to not only escape the prison, but they also seemed to vanish into thin air. This Alcatraz escape is one of the most mind-boggling prison break stories ever. And just when we thought we knew everything about it, a new book drops. Alcatraz, The Last Escape by Ken Widner and Mike Lynch, the former being the nephew of 2 of the escapees, was released on May 7th this year. I just finished this book, and I can say that it just throws more gasoline on the conspiracy fire. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me give you all the information you need from top to bottom to the very best of my ability. To fully appreciate the audacity, danger, and genius of this escape, we need to take a step back and look at the prison's history. The U.S. military saw the potential of the isolated Alcatraz Island in the mid-1800s. They originally turned Alcatraz into a military fort to guard against invaders during the California Gold Rush. Cannons were set up and a small garrison was stationed there. By the late 1800s, Alcatraz had morphed into a military prison. Fast forward to 1934, and Alcatraz was repurposed yet again. The federal government needed a place for the most dangerous criminals, the ones who were too risky or too rowdy for other prisons. Alcatraz's isolation and natural defenses made it the perfect spot, so it was transformed into the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, intended to be the most secure prison in the country. Turning Alcatraz into a federal prison was no small feat. The cell house, built in the early 20th century, was beefed up with steel bars and reinforced concrete to prevent any escape attempts. Each cell was tiny, about 5 feet by 9 feet, equipped with a bed, sink, and toilet.
Oh, the ghetto! The ghetto. The ghetto. Ah! What is this, honey? Oh, I was shocked, honey. I was in tears almost. And they had a white refrigerator. I was like, oh, not a white refrigerator. Girl, please put your shoes on. Let's go find you a home, honey. Ooh.
The cells were arranged in rows with catwalks and gun galleries, allowing guards to keep a constant watch. The layout made sure no area was out of sight, making it nearly impossible for prisoners to plan an escape unnoticed. Outside, Alcatraz was surrounded by high barbed wire fences and guard towers equipped with searchlights and, of course, the armed guards. Plus, there was the island's natural defenses, the cold, strong currents, and supposedly great white sharks added to its fortress-like reputation.
You could never get away from the guards. It was very difficult. Every time there was a major movement, there was a count. And there were counts all through the night, and the counts were checked with the control center, and, you just had this absolute tight security.
When it comes to what life was like inside of the prison, I have read really mixed reports. Some say the tough reputation was a Hollywood embellishment. I read that the first warden, James A. Johnston, was a hard ass, but I also read that he liked to give them good food and as many helpings as they wanted. I also read that sometimes prisoners got no food. Inmates who behaved had access to privileges like a monthly movie. Some even requested dead to be transferred to Alcatraz. However, most of what I have read says that Alcatraz was designed to break the spirits of the prisoners as a way of reformation. I am more inclined to believe that it was not very pleasant at Alcatraz. Maybe in comparison to other federal prisons, it was fantastic, but for everyone else, I don't know if we'd consider it good conditions. The daily routine was strict and monotonous, with prisoners locked in their cell most of the day. Prisoners had 4 rights at Alcatraz: clothing, shelter, food, and medical care. Everything else was a privilege that needed to be earned, and those privileges were minimal. You could earn the ability to work, use the prison library, do some recreational activities like painting, and you could even earn correspondence with friends and family. Even if a prisoner did get the ability to write and receive letters, they were heavily censored. And visits were very, very rare, and when they did happen, they were conducted under strict supervision. If you went the opposite route of good behavior, you'd end up in solitary confinement, also known as the hole, which was reserved for rule breakers. Inmates in solitary were stripped of nearly all human contact. The cells were dark, damp, and cold, with only a small slot for food.
Door with a little slot and stick your food through if they give you any. And it had a real heavy screen wall over the top of that. Then they had about 2.5, 3 feet out, there was a big thick door like an icebox door. They closed that. And it had a little door on it where the guard can turn on the light. He controlled the lights up, outside. Pull that door down, look through a little glass, and see whether you're still in there and know what's happening. But when he closed it, you couldn't even see your hand before you, nothing. So I got used to making 3 steps and turn, 3 steps and turn, because I was about to freeze to death. See, that one fan was pulling air in, and the other fan was pulling it out. That's all the ventilation you had. And when it's real foggy outside, it's picking up all that cold, damp air and pushing it in there, the floor would get wet. And you didn't have anything to sleep on, you're naked, so you had to keep moving.
Some prisoners spent weeks in these conditions, emerging physically and mentally broken. While Alcatraz was home to notorious criminals like Machine Gun Kelly, Al Capone, and Whitey Bulger, the prison wasn't just for the most violent offenders. Instead, it housed those who were the hardest to manage and the most unruly within the federal prison system. Many of the inmates earned their ticket to Alcatraz by bribing guards and attempting escapes out of their prisons.
Prisoners sentenced to Alcatraz were all hard asses. They were prisoners who caused trouble in other prisons, federal prisons, and they were always prisoners that tried to escape.
These are men who came there for their behavior, which meant they worked their ways up from the reform schools, the state prisons, the federal prisons, and ultimately to Alcatraz. They came there because of their behavior. They were long-term incarcerated men.
The average population of Alcatraz was only about 260 to 275, and never once hit its capacity of 336, meaning it only held 1% of the federal prison population. No matter what life was truly like inside of the prison or how many prisoners there were, the goal was to straighten them out, encouraging better behavior. Once prison officials felt the inmate no longer posed a threat and could follow the rules, this is usually after about 5 years or so, he could then be transferred back to a regular federal prison to finish his sentence. Between the physical and mental obstacles, the prison was deemed inescapable. This did not stop inmates from trying, regardless. The Battle of Alcatraz, also known as the Alcatraz Prison Riot of 1946, is one of the most violent and dramatic events in the history of the prison. This attempted escape involved a group of inmates who staged a bloody uprising that lasted for nearly 2 days and resulted in multiple deaths and injuries. There were 6 primary instigators of the battle, including and led by the mastermind Bernard Coy, a bank robber serving a 26-year sentence. He meticulously studied the routines of the guards and the layout of the prison to devise an escape strategy. Coy's plan hinged on capturing weapons and taking hostages. On May 2nd, 1946, Coy and his accomplices seized an opportune moment when they overpowered a guard in the prison's C block. They used a makeshift bar spreader to widen the bars of a gun gallery, which allowed Coy to climb up and access the gallery where weapons were stored. Coy armed himself with rifles and handguns and passed weapons to his fellow conspirators. Once armed, the inmates took several guards hostage and attempted to unlock the prison door leading to the prison yard. However, their plan hit a critical snag when they couldn't find the key to the yard door. Frustrated and desperate, the inmates decided to barricade themselves within the cell house, taking the hostages with them. They hoped to negotiate their way to freedom, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. The prison administration responded swiftly, with Warden James A. Johnston calling in support from the Coast Guard and the Marines. A fierce battle ensued, with the inmates and guards exchanging gunfire. The guards, aided by reinforcements, launched a series of assaults to regain control of the cell house. The standoff lasted for nearly 48 hours, with continuous gunfire, explosions, and attempts to dislodge the inmates. The battle resulted in the deaths of 2 correctional officers, who were killed by the inmates. 3 of the instigators, including the mastermind Coy, were killed in the firefight. The remaining conspirators were captured and subsequently tried for their roles in the uprising. 2 were sentenced to death, and the other, who was only 19 at the time of the riot, received a life sentence. On April 13, 1943, James Borman, Harold Brest, Fred Hunter, and Floyd Hamilton attempted their escape. They managed to saw through the bars of a window in the prison's mat shop. From there, they climbed out and made their way to the water's edge. Their goal was to swim across the unpredictable waters of San Francisco Bay to the mainland. The escape did not go as planned. A guard on one of the watchtowers spotted the inmates and immediately raised the alarm. The escapees were fired upon by the guards as they attempted to swim away. James Borman was shot and killed in the water. Harold Brest was wounded and captured before he could make it far from the shore, and Fred Hunter was also apprehended soon after. But Floyd Hamilton managed to elude capture for a short period by hiding in a small cave on the island's rocky shore. For 2 days, he survived by drinking rainwater and eating whatever he could find. The intense manhunt by prison guards and federal agents eventually forced him out of hiding, and he was captured at the end of that 2-day period. What I found interesting about this attempt was that the prison officials said he was presumed drowned. I thought that was important to set up the final attempt I want to share before getting into the Great Escape. Just remember, these officials were a bit quick to jump the gun on the whole, "oh, they drowned" narrative. Years prior, on December 16th, 1937, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe also took a crack at escaping the prison. Unlike other escape attempts that ended in violence or quick recapture, Cole and Rowe's fate remains unknown to this day. They were both seasoned criminals with histories of robbery and other crimes. Cole was serving a sentence for kidnapping and robbery, while Rowe was incarcerated for bank robbery. Both had reputations for being difficult inmates, and their previous escape attempts from other prisons had resulted in their transfer to Alcatraz, 'cause, there's no way they could break out of that place. Cole and Rowe worked in the prison's mat shop, which was located on the southern edge of the island. This location was critical to their escape plan, as it provided them with the opportunity to get closer to the island's shoreline. They used tools that were available to them in the workshop to saw through the flat iron bars of a window. The escapees took advantage of a dense fog that blanketed San Francisco Bay on the day of their attempt. This fog severely reduced visibility, providing them with significant cover to avoid detection. When Cole and Rowe reached the shore, they were met with the cold, swift waters of the bay. Unlike some other escape attempts, there was no concrete evidence of their exact method of crossing the bay. It is speculated that they may have constructed a makeshift raft using materials from the prison, or they may have just attempted to swim. The guards and prison officials scoured the island and the surrounding waters, but the men had vanished without a trace. The official position of prison authorities was that the strong current and very cold water likely led to the men's drowning, and their bodies were just swept out to sea, which could very well be the case. But I thought it was odd that no one ever brings this escape up. I guess because there's very little evidence. There's no evidence. I just sort of figured that out for myself, by myself. But yes, another drowned situation. Now we have reached the big one. The escape where 3 men pulled off something extraordinary, to say the least. One of the men, Frank Morris, born in 1926, was a career criminal with a high IQ and a history of escape attempts at other prisons. The other men, John and Clarence Anglin, brothers born into a large family of poor farmers, also had extensive criminal records, primarily involving bank robberies. The planning of the escape was an elaborate process that took about 6 months and required ingenuity, patience, and cooperation among the conspirators, which was very difficult because the only opportunity they really had to meet up was their brief time in the prison yard. It's often said, much to the Anglin family's dismay, Morris was the mastermind, and the Anglin brothers provided the manpower and resourcefulness needed for the plan's execution. The escape team consisted of the 3 men and initially another inmate named Alan West. The men began constructing tools and equipment from materials available within the prison. Using discarded saw blades, spoons, and a drill fashioned from a vacuum cleaner motor, they ticked away at the concrete and gradually widened the ventilation ducts in their cells. And this required an insane amount of patience. The guards came around every hour to peek inside the cells to make sure the prisoners were in bed. So these men were stuck using these crude tools, working in a way that wouldn't make too much noise, and stopping once an hour to hop back in bed waiting for the prison guard to walk on by, before continuing the process all over again. Once they started to make significant progress, they realized that a large hole would be pretty noticeable. They solved this problem by acquiring paint from one of their workshop jobs and used that and cardboard to craft a false wall/vent segment that covered their progress to avoid detection. You may think that would be incredibly obvious and clearly visible, like no way a guard wouldn't notice cardboard instead of cement in a cell, but when guards were doing bed checks, they were about 9 feet away from where the rear of the cell would be. It would be dark and the guard would only have a flashlight to illuminate a fraction of the cell, and most likely he would be focusing that light on the inmate. Even if they meandered past during the day, they are still probably about 9 feet away, and they most likely aren't looking that closely. Once the hole was wide enough for them to slip through, they set up a secret workshop-type situation in an unguarded utility corridor. Here they would build a makeshift raft and life vests. They did this by collecting prison-issued raincoats that they asked other inmates for.
They also fashion paddles out of wood scraps and plywood that they find around the prison. They steal a concertina and use it as a kind of bellows to inflate this makeshift raft.
They learned how to turn these raincoats into rafts and life vests, as well as how to make waterproof glue by reading a popular mechanics magazine. To allow them more time out of bed without alarming guards, the men created dummy heads from a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair.
The dummy heads have been fashioned out of anything that these 3 men could have gotten their hands on. They're paper mache, but they're also soap. They're also cement.
The finishing touch on those paper mache heads, Clarence Anglin takes real live human hair clippings from the barber shop and pastes them to the top of the heads.
They placed their little arts and crafts project on their pillow and tucked it in as a way to fool the guards, who, again, had limited visibility. This way, the men could have more time to keep working on the details of their escape. They reached another obstacle when they finally made their way up, and I'm saying that like it's a step or two, but from what I understand, to get from behind their cell up to the vent shaft they planned on using, they had to utilize pipes to travel 30 feet up. And once they reached the top to inspect that vent shaft, they realized it was bolted into place. This made the wait even longer because they had to file the bolts down. Once they got that done, it was off to the races. On the night of June 11th, 1962, Morris and the Anglins squeezed through the holes they created and utilized those water pipes to climb 30 feet up into the utility corridor again. After they got through the vent shaft and made it to the roof, they shimmied down a 50-foot drain pipe.
What you gonna do, shimmy down the drain pipe?
And navigated their way to the prison yard. Then they climbed over a 12-foot barbed wire fence, possibly 20 feet. I've read both. Either way, they utilized a blanket to avoid impalement and made their way to the northeast shore of the island. There, they inflated their raft using a concertina, which is a small accordion-like instrument. And this is the point in the escape where stories begin to veer off in different directions. 3 to be exact. The official story out there is that the men used their homemade raft and set off into the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. By morning, they had vanished. Officials conducted an extensive manhunt and found personal belongings of the Anglins, pictures of family members, I believe, tucked in a waterproof raincoat makeshift wallet situation, so they were preserved. Despite this, no conclusive evidence of their fate was ever found, and the FBI officially closed the case in 1979, saying that the escapees likely drowned in the bay. That was direction number 1. Direction number 2 is what Alan West told officials.
Escape got started with Alan West. It was his idea. We all heard it together from him.
Alan West was a convict serving 10 years for car theft. His job in cell house maintenance, cleaning and painting the prison, took him to the top of the cell block. It was there that he found the exit to freedom, an old disused air vent that hadn't been cemented closed.
To backtrack just a bit, this again was the inmate that was supposed to escape with the other 3 men but couldn't remove his grill in time and was left behind. Once the guards realized the 3 men had escaped the next morning, West went to them and said, "Hey, if you give me some leniency, I'll tell you what their plan was." West shared that the men planned to sail north to Angel Island instead of towards San Francisco. The chances of being spotted were much greater in San Francisco, so this was a smart plan that just required a bit more time and distance. Angel Island was a decommissioned military base, which meant there were minimal people, lots of space, and potentially a lot of helpful supplies. Alan West went on to say that the plan was to go from Angel Island to nearby Marin County, which is mainland. Once there, they were going to acquire a vehicle, aka Grand Theft Auto. In 2003, documents about this escape were stumbled upon by a U.S. Marshal who thought it would be cool to look into. Within the documents, there was information about a car that was reported stolen in Marin County the very same night of the escape. And the witness said that the car had 3 suspicious-looking men inside of it. He also found that a few hours later, a car matching the same description as that stolen vehicle, a blue Chevy, ran someone off the road. And that car also had 3 men inside. And that brings us to this new book, and let me start by saying I am aware that this book, understandably, has quite a bit of bias. The Anglin family is very involved. Like I said, the nephew is the one co-authoring this, and the family is not pleased about the way the Anglin brothers have been portrayed in media as sort of these dumb redneck hicks just along for the ride. The aim of this book seems to be, well, a few things, but I think the main intent was to clear their name, I guess. I don't know if that's the best wording. They wanted John and Clarence Anglin depicted more accurately from what they knew of them. That makes this book very personal, and that is a huge benefit for the book. But also, it's hard to read and not wonder what's embellished. Perhaps nothing, but there is this fictional dialogue that happens throughout the book. I don't know how the nephew would have such detailed information about conversations had when he was nowhere around. I understand that it supplements the book, and it's well done, but not for a book that is meant to set the record straight. I think sticking to the facts would be best, but that could potentially be very boring. I do see both sides of this. It was a good read regardless. I enjoyed it when I suspended a little bit of belief. The gist of what he claimed happened was that the men used an extension cord, which by the way was miraculously found in a wheelbarrow, on a guarded lit wharf. Apparently the guard was inside of one of the buildings on the wharf at the time. Lucky them. Oh, and what makes this even more miraculous is that they found this new extension cord after losing the original extension cord they had brought along with them. Apparently one of them had dropped it at some point during their escape, so just great luck all around. They take this extension cord and they tie it to what the book labels as a prison transport. I assume it's like some sort of bigger boat or ferry that carries people to and from the island. They hung on and were carried out to sea by the transport until they saw a signal from a white boat, which was set up by their friend Mickey Cohen, who was an LA crime boss, and they knew him from before their time at Alcatraz. An eyewitness who was also a trained police officer off duty recounted seeing a pristine white boat with no light and no sound that looked suspicious. After watching it for a bit, he saw a light flash out to the bay from the boat. He did file a report about what he had seen and was interrogated intensely by FBI. Sidebar, the whole flashing light signal was so not covert. Such a bad idea if this is really what happened. At this point, they untie themselves loose from the transport and row that raft to the rendezvous point. The white boat brought them to the mainland, and they met up with a former pal and also their sister. The sister, Noelle, I believe is her name, drove them to a small plane, which then took them to a fruit and marijuana farm in Mexico, where they were greeted by friends and Cuervos Rancheros for breakfast, along with fake IDs and $1,000 in cash, again courtesy of Mickey Cohen, a very, very nice character apparently. He gave this to the men to restart their lives, which they did in Brazil, allegedly. It's a very fantastical story that seems like it would be perfect for Netflix. The nephew certainly is not shy about his desire to share the real story with mainstream media, so who knows, we could actually end up seeing this play out on our TV screens. The first signs of the escape were discovered during the routine morning bed check the next morning. Guards found the bed of the inmates were occupied, but not responding to the guards' orders. Upon closer inspection and a little bit of a poke, the guard decapitated one of the inmates. Or so he thought for a few seconds, until he realized it was a papier-mâché head. Alarm bells were immediately raised, and the prison went into lockdown. Guards and officials swarmed the cell house. searching for any clues or signs of the escapees. That's when Alan West piped up and the manhunt ensued, and we are left to ponder what that morning actually looked like from the escapees' point of view. Was it like one of the 3 experiences I shared, or something entirely different? I feel like there are bits of the truth scattered throughout each of these stories. The police, or whatever officials were involved, at the very best seemed to be secretive with certain aspects of the investigation, and at the very worst, straight up lied about certain aspects of the investigation. One example, a pretty big one, police shared that they never found a raft, but it has also been said that there was an APV about a raft being found on the island in the official police report. And a key part of that raft finding was that it was found on the island, not floating around, not washed up ashore, on the island. Big difference. And again, that blue Chevy that was reported stolen the very same night of the escape, when Alan specifically said that was a part of their original plan to steal a car on the mainland, that not being used as vital information is a bit sketchy to me. A lot sketchy to me. Whether you believe the men escaped by plane to Mexico, stole that blue Chevy, or simply drowned in the tumultuous waters, I think we can all agree their plan was ingenious. I personally don't believe we will ever know the truth if we don't already know it, but never say never. What I do know is people will be pondering about the what ifs and admiring the ingenuity, passion for freedom, and pure cojones on these men for a long time to come. The amount of times I have said Azkaban instead of Alcatraz in this video, it's so embarrassing, but you'll never know. Well, now you will.